we have to start with seeking the information that you need in order to form a full opinion about something before you put that post on Instagram.
Yeah.
Before you respond to someone on Twitter or Facebook.
Before is a key word for sure. Hello, hello, hello. Bri and I, Henderson. How's it going?
Hello. All is well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm happy, guys. This is my friend Bri, aka Miss Henderson. Can you introduce yourself to our lovely viewers?
Sure. Well, hey everybody. Hope you're all doing well in these crazy times. Like Quentin said, my name is Bri. Normally my kids just call me Miss Henderson. I'm a second grade teacher here in Tampa, Florida, and I love what I do, and I love educating people, and I love educating myself, and I'm excited for this conversation.
It's a conversation that I think needs to be had. We live in some crazy times right now, so I'm excited to kind of dive in and talk about Pastor Mike Todd's latest sermon, The Revolution of Racism. But I'm excited to step into this this service and have this open conversation about you. Well, first of all, overall, what did you think about his sermon, The Revolution of Racism?
Overall, I feel like it's a conversation that is necessary. And it's also a conversation in our community of faith that oftentimes doesn't happen enough. And like, I kind of felt my toes being stepped on a little bit, like, wow, when was the last time we really sat down and from a biblical perspective, really dissected what's going on in the heart of our nation?
That means that we get to have conversations that are usually a little difficult, conversations that are unedited and unfiltered, conversations that we can ask questions in the confines of love, and there be real understanding. And that's what I'm praying for you, is that today we're about to have a conversation that is unedited, that is really unbiased, that's going to be real experience, and I'm praying for understanding. This is the time where you call your kids in and tell them to put down Fortnite and their iPad for a second.
And, you know, what is the heart condition that allows racism to still thrive? So it was convicting.
There was a couple times and someone's like, oh, he in my living room, he's talking directly to me. I gotta change my ways, but it was helpful. Sure. So one of the first things that he said, one of the first 2 points he made is kind of deciphering between raising racism and repeating racism. And so a lot of times, without even realizing, or maybe with realizing it, a lot of parents teach their children racism.
Do you know all of us are raised in racism? Yeah. Whether you believe it or not, we are currently raising racism. How we respond in this moment will either feed the monster or starve the monster.
Definitely. I mean, like, I was born and raised in North Philadelphia, and it's a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood. So we didn't really have too many people from any other background or ethnicity group in our neighborhood. But on those occasions where we had to go outside of our neighborhood, it was always, you know, say please and thank you. You know, us Northerners, we didn't really do the whole yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes or no sir thing. We didn't really do that. But, you know, definitely ask for things with a smile. You know, a phrase that was passed around a lot in my immediate and extended family was, you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar, which, you know, on the surface seems like a really just like, oh, that's just a nice way to interact with people. But the undercurrent of that was, we don't want to get in public and start sass talking people who think that they have authority over your life, even though they may not actually.
Correct.
So it was, so it's like, you know, when things like that happen, there's a fine line between it being racism and between it just being a survival tactic.
And I asked you that question because that's one of the first questions that Pastor Mike asked the panel discussion, which in this video, I'll include like links to the video so you guys can go back and watch it. But it was so interesting looking at and hearing the stories that the panelists were discussing. They had three separate guys. They ranged in age from probably like late 20s to like upper 60s, 70s, and they all had different experiences. And one experience was from Pastor Mike Todd's father. His father, I think he grew up in the South, if I'm not mistaken, grew up in the South, and they were in an area where it seemed like they were in an area where, not it seemed like, it was definitely an area where there's like a lot of racism going on. So he's one of the first groups of people that helped to integrate the schools.
So that was in 1966, and we had to fight basically every day. They did all kind of things because they didn't want us. That was when integration first started.
You said you
in
had
Alabama.
to fight every day?
Every day we had confrontations, every day. When we would go down the hall changing classes, you know, we didn't know anybody. It was a school of about 800 kids, and there was about 10 black kids.
Since you're a teacher, how difficult do you think it will be to be a student in this time frame when you're one of 10 black people and there's white people abusing you and throwing things at you when you're just trying to get your education, okay?
Right. That's such a good question. I think that it was definitely detrimental to it. I mean, like, first of all, when you're dealing with kids in education, they have to feel 100% safe and 100% comfortable in order for optimal levels of education to actually take place, in order for them to be able to open up enough to change the way that they thought about something, or to be comfortable to make mistakes in front of other people. And if a kid is not comfortable in a classroom, if a kid does not feel welcomed in the classroom, not just by their peers, but also their teachers,
wow,
it completely hijacks their educational experience. So to be able to sit in a classroom and then not only have to deal with the fact that school is stressful for kids, like school is stressful, and then on top of that, dealing with racism, it wasn't good for the black kids. And if you really think about it, it wasn't good for the white kids either, growing up in that kind of environment, because they were learning a culture of hate.
Wow, that's
and
good.
We oftentimes have to stop and think about, okay, yeah, racism had a really big impact on black children in this country, but look at the impact that it had on white children in this country.
Wow.
It damaged generations of children.
Exactly. Do you think,
it one or the other? Yeah.
Racism should be taught in the school? And when I ask that question, I don't mean from a historical perspective, but should a teacher stand in the classroom and teach them about, quote unquote, the morality, good and wrong of racism? I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of a student, and I don't know if I would have received, if I'm a black student, I don't know if I could receive like a racism talk from a white teacher. If that makes sense. So do you think it's appropriate?
Yeah, I did. As far as it being appropriate, I definitely think it's appropriate, because one thing as educators, we don't just teach, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. We also teach children social skills, because if you think about it, we have them for 8 and sometimes 9 to 10 hours out of the day. That's almost more hours than they're with their parents. So we have to teach them the social skills and and also survival skills on how to interact with different populations of people in a successful way that brings about cooperation and teaches them how to work together to solve problems. So if we don't teach them, we actually have a term for it called social emotional learning. And without it, they don't function well in the classroom, let alone outside the classroom. So we do have to implement into curriculums and into lessons every day. Okay, so-and-so sitting next to you looks different from you, but that doesn't mean that you're better than them or that they're better than you. You both are equal. And then from there, we can address, okay, now that you see each other as equals, now we can give each other what we each need to be successful. And the only way kids learn that is if we explicitly teach it to them. They're not going to learn it through osmosis, or they're going to learn to do the opposite by watching somebody else's bad example. So you have to take those moments. You have to make it a daily practice to teach them, this is what it looks like to be anti-racist.
Gotcha.
This is what it looks like to extend equality and to extend equity, and to understand that those two things are not the same.
So one of his first points is revealing racism. So as we talked about earlier, racism has been around forever. You and I are both Black. We both know these things, but now we have the use of technology. We have self
Mm.
footage, we have photographs, we have like physical evidence. And so my heart weeps and I get sad for all like the Black men and women who are in jail who had similar situations happen, kind of similar to those, that didn't have video evidence, who didn't have
Right.
photographic evidence. Um, it's so sorrowful. It's so sorrowful. In what ways do you think we can do a better job of revealing racism?
I think that we have to, number one, stop fearing it so much,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a topic of conversation. A lot of people are afraid to talk about racism, either because it's going to make them or someone else uncomfortable, or they might actually find out through conversation that they themselves are racist. And because of those two outcomes, those two possible outcomes, a lot of people shy away from it. Um, but I think another reason why it's important to reveal racism is because if we don't, there's going to be a lot of abuse of power that's going to continue on in our society at
Mm-hmm.
all levels.
Yep.
In politics, in social issues, in homes, in
Yep.
neighborhoods. And if we don't peel back the cover on that and really kind of expose what's really making all these mechanisms in our society work, we're just going to be sitting around scratching our heads, wondering like, what is the problem? What is going wrong? And it's somebody in the corner is like, we tried to tell y'all. We got some systemic racism going on over here and nobody's addressing it. So we keep having the same issues over and over again. But exactly. And it just becomes cyclical because nobody is addressing the actual root of the problem. So it has to be revealed. We have to talk about it.
I love that. The second point he brought up was repenting for racism or reasoning with racism. And I think a lot of times I see this on social media where I'm from Alabama. I'll still keep in contact somewhat with a lot of friends from Alabama, from the deep South. And during this George Floyd, I call it pandemic, during this entire racism pandemic, which is not, I don't know if you call it pandemic because this has been going on for years and years, but now that it's been brought to light, I feel like a lot of my cohorts who are white, I feel like I see their true colors now. Some of their comments that they post online and some of the things that are spreading, it's like, oh, I never knew you thought this way. And in your opinion, what are some ways that people can kind of move away from that mentality?
Well, I think first of all, we have to seek knowledge because a lot of people are speaking from an uninformed platform.
Ooh.
And
Preaching.
It sucks, but it is what it is. And and I try not to get into the habit of calling people stupid because that is not a nice thing. That's not a nice thing to call someone. But the reality of it is that a lot of people are speaking about topics that they don't have a working knowledge about. So a lot of the things that they are saying are coming from places of ignorance, and not ignorant in the colloquial term of ignorance, but literally they don't have the knowledge about something, and then they're talking about it, and then they end up spreading misinformation, or they end up with their foot in their mouth because they said something that's totally outlandish and incorrect.
Wow.
So like we have to start with education. We have to start with seeking the information that you need in order to form a full opinion about something before you put that post on Instagram.
Yeah.
Before you respond to someone on Twitter or Facebook.
Before is a key word for sure.
That is the key word. You have to be knowledgeable about what you're talking about. And the bottom line is a lot of people, number one, don't even understand what racism is. Also, a lot of people don't have a working knowledge of the basic functions of our judicial system and basic laws that every citizen of this country is entitled to, like due process. And whether or not a person in this country has committed a crime or not, they still have the right to due process.
Correct.
They have a right to be in front of a judge, in front of a jury of their peers, and to be sentenced and to either plead guilty or not guilty for the crime that they were accused of committing. And the bottom line is the curbside where they got arrested or where they had an interaction with the law enforcement officer is not a courtroom.
Correct.
So there is absolutely no legal standing for a cop to be judge, jury, and executioner. So because a lot of people don't have the basic understandings of how the legal system is supposed to work, they find themselves saying like, oh, well, he had drugs in his system, so he deserved it. No, honey, that's not how it works.
One of the things about responding to racism is, that's the third point that Pastor Mike Todd brought up, responding to racism. And so he went around the panel and asked each of the men to kind of give something they could do to respond to racism. And I love Pastor Mike Todd's father. He gave the example of the Good Samaritan, which is such a good story. I never thought about it, but when he broke it down for us, it almost is a story about kind of racial reconciliation. People who are completely different helping somebody else. And so for those of you at home who aren't familiar with it, it's from Luke 10 and 30. And essentially, a man was robbed and left for dead. And 3 separate people come by and pass by. The first guy was a priest. He saw the man wounded, almost dying, and crossed on the other side of the road and kept going. The second guy was a Levite. He saw a guy on the ground, almost dead, left for dead, and he kept.
Praise the worship leader. Ooh,
that's it.
Dang.
That's it, worship leader. And then there was the third guy, the Good Samaritan. And from this time period, we know Samaritans are people that are completely different from those. He stopped. Not only did he stop, but he stopped and took care of the man. Like, how relevant do you think that story is to this time frame that we're living in?
It's 100% relevant. I mean, and I think a lot of people forget that there were different racial groups in the Bible. And the way that they interacted with each other is definitely recorded there. And I think it is important to frame that, you know, the story of the Good Samaritan is a parable. So it's not exactly like an actual real life account of something that happened, but it's a teachable moment that reflects a lot of the sentiment that was actually happening during the time. The Samaritans were a race, an ethnic group of people that were completely treated horribly by Jewish people of the time. And they were marginalized. They were persecuted. They were, you know, people were, discrimination was high against them. They weren't welcome in businesses. Does that sound familiar? Oh.
You sound very familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So so that story is 100% relevant to the issues that America has had throughout history and that we're currently still having now. It shines a light in a biblical way on how absolutely ludicrous it is to treat people differently because they come from a different culture or a different ethnic group or a different race from you. Because at the end of the day, we are all capable of compassion no matter where we come from.
Yep.
And we see here in this parable, the man who was least likely to extend aid.
Least likely.
He was the one who did it. And, you know, the people who you thought would for sure come to this man's aid walked by.
Yep.
Like as if nothing needed to be done. And I think that is definitely a mirror moment, right? It holds a mirror up to especially us as believers because it shines a light on those areas of self work that we need to do within ourselves before we start pointing fingers at what everybody else needs to do. Now, have you examined yourself? If you see somebody in need, even if they were a person who persecuted you, would you extend compassion to them? Would you extend aid? And it's a mirror moment.
Yeah. It's so tough because at the end of the panel discussion, Pastor Mike Todd asked Black people, can you, I wish I remember the exact wording, but it says something to the effect of, can you forgive the validity of your pain to try to move forward in this, or something to that effect?
To all my Black people that are watching this right now, I have a question for you. Would you be willing, this is so serious, would you be willing to lay down the validity of your pain to see unity? I know that's going to be hard. I know that's going to be tough. But if we're ever going to see racial reconciliation, it's valid. It hasn't been fair. It's not right. There's injustices, but it's going to take all of us to change legislation, to move things in the spirit, to be able to create new communities, to start our own banks, to be able to do, I'm just saying stuff right now, but it's going to take all of us. But would you be willing to, my black brothers and sisters, to lay down the validity of the pain so that we could see unity?
Like, we are
Yeah.
to some degree valid for feeling this hurt. We're valid for
Right.
feeling pain from year after year, but can we possibly set that aside to try to come up with some reconciliation? And that's a lot of tough questions, but that was also another tough question.
Yeah.
I think I can, but it's tough. It's not something that's going to happen overnight when you're paying.
Definitely not. It's not like flipping of a light switch situation. It takes daily work. It takes having conversations with people who belong to groups who have hurt you or your people. And like you said, though, one thing that I totally agree with is the pain that Black people have felt in this country is 100% valid.
Mm-hmm.
It is not imagined, and it is not a myth. So I want to say that first. And then I also want to say that by no means do we need to forget our people's story. That's not an option. We cannot forget our people's story. We cannot forget their stories of overcoming oppression, and we cannot also forget what was done to them, because it did happen.
Yep.
And I don't think that there is a valid argument for telling Black people to forget what has happened to us, either in this country or internationally. What I do think, though, is once we learn what has happened to us, we then have to now start making strides to make sure it does not happen again, not only to us, but also to other people. Things in our nation and in our world are not going to get better overnight, but I think as long as people keep having conversations like the one we're having now, as long as people keep reaching out to people who are different from them, who have different mindsets, and don't just sit in a room full of people who agree with them all the time, it'll definitely push change. And just in the last 2 weeks, since all the protests and all the activism that it's had in this country, so many things have already changed. And it's like, can you imagine what this place is going to look like if we keep this momentum going?
I like it.
If we keep these conversations going, already so many things have changed. So many laws have been made. So many things have been made unacceptable and illegal. So many people have been called out and held accountable.
Call them out. Point them out. It's tiring, but we're gonna make it through it. One way or the other. We're gonna find some joy in it.
Yeah, so, that's right. You gotta keep doing the work.
You're so full of a light. You're so full of insight. So thank you much for being on the channel. Thank you for shedding light. Well, guys, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If there's anything that you want to see, make sure you comment down below. Make today a great day to go achieve some great things. Go read some great books. Go watch some great movies on racial reconciliation. Go achieve some great things. See you guys later. Bye.